Great War ended 2 months ago. No peace treaty has been negotiated, and a dozen small wars are still raging in Europe. Most of the world's leaders are coming to Paris to find a way out of this mess. It is called the Paris Peace Conference. Its repercussions will be felt for the next 100 years. Harold Nicholson is part of the British delegation. Like most of Paris, Nicholson wants to see the politician they're calling the God of Justice. Kings, queens, prime ministers, and emirs are already in Paris. Now the deity arrives. He is Woodrow Wilson, President of the United States of America. John Maynard Keynes, British economist. He won't go to the parade today. He doesn't go with the crowd. The peace conference, Keynes thinks, will be about money. But then there are the widows. Don't forget who killed their husbands, they say. The people who killed their husbands, the Germans, are not in Paris today. They'll be summoned later.
Où est la Chine?
On retravaille dessus. Quelqu'un a vu la Hongrie?
Demandez donc aux bolcheviks.
Laissez passer le Moyen-Orient.
Attention, vas-y.
Not far from the parade, map makers are reshaping the world. 2 empires have disappeared. A dozen new countries are being created.
Écoutez-moi cette foule.
Bodies are still being found in the mud of northern France. The desire for a harsh peace treaty is overwhelming. Woodrow Wilson says no. There'll be no revenge. I'll give you something better. I'll give you a League of Nations and peace everlasting. He has inspired the world as no leader in history.
Nous étions en nombre mille, venus d'Italie et d'ailleurs. Garibaldi dans la Sicile, nous conduisait
While in Paris, Harold Nicholson will keep a diary.
January the 20th. We are all dependent upon America, not only for the war that has just ended, but for the peace before us. The Americans have won the war, now they will win the peace.
Making peace will not be any easier than making war. The enemy's the same. As Paris prepares for peace, there's a celebration south of Berlin for German soldiers returning home. Many Germans don't think they lost the war. They signed an armistice, not an admission of defeat. In northern France, there's only death. The war was so violent that half the French dead. The bodies of 700,000 men are unidentifiable. After the parade, Paris turns cold. "10,000 politicians, diplomats, arms sellers, and spies are arriving for the peace conference. Many have never seen snow. The small delegations get unheated walk-ups. The big ones, entire hotels. As the delegations total up their claims against Germany and her allies, Paris comes alive once again. The day before the conference opens, Wilson consults his most trusted aide, Edward House, about a League of Nations. The League would stop small conflicts before they became world wars. Then the president prays silently. He will see no other visitors this day. The peace talks will take place in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Quai d'Orsay. 200 delegates, 37 countries. The League of Nations will be hotly debated. Germany will be punished. For the first time in history, a world conference will be open to moving picture cameras. The politicians will be speaking to the world.
Monsieur le Président, Mesdames, Messieurs, je déclare la conférence de paix de Paris officiellement ouverte.
There are 5 countries at the head table. They are known as the Supreme Council. Together they have lost about 3 million men in the war. The smaller powers that fill the room have lost another 2 million. Georges Clemenceau, the Prime Minister of France, is the chairman of the conference. In deference to President Wilson, Clemenceau speaks in English.
I don't think there is any question that we are here to decide the issue of German guilt and ultimately of German reparations. We want our countries made whole again.
History has taught Clemenceau everything he needs to know about war. You make alliances, then you fight other alliances. The League of Nations is for dreamers.
Monsieur David Lloyd George, Premier Ministre de la Grande-Bretagne.
Lloyd George has just won an election by promising he will get $300 billion from the Germans.
I too believe the issue of reparations must be dealt with soon. It is not just to compensate the victims for losses, terrible losses, unimaginable losses. It is what is right.
Those who suffered, the French, the British, the Italian, the Belgians, and plenty of others, they want compensation for the war.
Monsieur Vittorio Orlando, Premier Ministre d'Italie.
Italy flirted with joining Germany in the war. Then she got a better offer from the Allies.
Italia would very much like to discutere dall'Adriatico, which is of vital interesse per nostro futuro. We need a port to harbor.
The port Italy needs is for her warships. Unfortunately, it belongs to Yugoslavia. Italy is broke and near anarchy.
Messieurs, la voix qui maquino, le Japon.
Japan. She helped win the war for the Allies in the Pacific. She wants territory that belongs to China. It is estimated the conference will last 3 to 4 weeks. During that time, it will be effectively a world government. At the center of it all, one visionary politician who will save the world.
How long must we repeat history before we learn that revenge won't work? I have every confidence the League of Nations will change that.
Germany has not been touched by the war, physically. But she has lost 1,700,000 men, suffered more than 7 million casualties. The Paris peacemakers will deal with Germany when they're good and ready. In the meantime, the leaders have other business.
Australia did its bit in the war. We're 300 million pounds sterling in debt right now. We need New Guinea to balance our books.
The small powers line up to congratulate their patron saint. A League of Nations might give them a better chance of survival. In the meantime, they would like to be rewarded for supporting the Allies. Eleutherios Venizelos, Prime Minister of Greece. He's looking for land. The Emir Faisal is looking for an Arab country to govern, perhaps Iraq.
خصوصا المثقفين منا لنا نظرة عميقة ومتجانسة للحركة الصهيونية.
Chaim Weizmann, Zionist. He wants a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Edward House has warned Wilson against coming to Europe. These are countries that solve their problems with the gun, he says. Nicholson writes, you could not avoid a feeling of awe at the terrible responsibilities shouldered by the statesman. The fate of mankind was hanging by a thread. Everywhere he goes, Wilson is followed by enormous crowds. He is a devout Presbyterian. His father and grandfather were both preachers. Wilson is never more alive than when he is close to the people. All over Paris, hundreds of experts are crafting different parts of the peace treaty. John Maynard Keynes has set up the British Reparations Committee in an empty school.
For France, this is what we have so far. Inhabitants driven from their homes, 2,732,000. Villages devastated, 4,022. Houses completely or partly destroyed, 594,616. Factories destroyed, 20,539. Livestock carried off, 1,360,000. The British numbers aren't in yet. Not so many farms, but her shipping is decimated.
The real problem will come when each country tries to put a dollar figure on what a dead soldier is worth, what he might have earned had he lived. No accounting of any war in history has tried to do that. There is still a partial food blockade around Germany from the Great War. Thousands of Germans are dying of starvation each week. Nothing will change until Germany is called to Paris.
We have an absolute right to punish those responsible for crimes for which no equivalent can be found in the Napoleonic Wars.
We must not make an enemy of Germany. They are down, but nations do not remain down forever.
Italia ha perso 600,000 men in the war. Non possiamo parlare dell'Italia un poco adesso? Per favore. We have been promised territorio.
帝国日本は我が国にとって極めて重要な品のいくつかの章について議論したく存じます。
China, as so many countries, is counting on Wilson to protect its territorial integrity. Delegates know the conference is the last opportunity to acquire territory before borders are frozen.
The League of Nations will offer security that until now only could be found by military alliances. Once you prepare for war, you get it. So maybe for once we prepare for peace. Cartographers receive constant directives from the Quai d'Orsay. Mountain ranges will be divided, train tracks diverted, people moved from one rule to another.
Peu importe la langue qu'il parle. La décision a déjà été prise.
Il reste environ 60 000 Serbes en Roumanie.
Et 74 000 Roumains et 400 000 Hongrois vivent encore en Yougoslavie. Où que nous tracions les nouvelles frontières, il y aura toujours des populations lésées. Et chaque frontière qu'on rate est une guerre potentielle. Cela ne peut pas marcher.
C'est tout bénéfice pour nous de récupérer les colonies allemandes. Mais à quoi bon mettre de l'argent sur une colonie loin de tout si nous ne pouvons obtenir des troupes le moment venu? La France aurait été décimée sans l'aide de ces colonies.
Well, so long as Monsieur Clemenceau does not train big nigger armies for the purposes of aggression. Though, of course, we ourselves see the need of arming the Polynesians against their neighbors.
Wilson has said there will be no more colonies. He has promised self-determination for all minorities. The sheer audacity of the president's ideas is startling.
Meet Winston Churchill, Secretary of the Navy. I've come to get myself an army, he says. He's convinced fighting will start again.
Harold Nicholson has the Balkans, an area known for starting wars and breaking careers.
January 23rd. They show no shame at all, demanding most of Hungary. I take with me the papers about the secret Italian treaty. His aim is to maintain in Paris the moral prestige. February the 4th. Talk to General Spears. He talks about disarmament, about the League. The thing to do is to get it into their thick heads. No more massacres.
Paris is a mecca for young idealists. Half the class of Harvard 1915 is there. The other half died in the war. One by one, the small states are hustled to the Quai d'Orsay. Each will get a few minutes before the Supreme Council.
C'est grâce à vous, Monsieur le Président Wilson, que le peuple tchèque, český národ po 3 staletích znovu nabyl svobody a nezávislosti, de plein droit. il a retrouvé la souveraineté.
فنحن مستعدون للقتال ولا أستطيع تصور أن حكامنا مجتمعين هنا سيعاملوننا كما عملنا الطغاة في الماضي إنني ولكن بأنهم تدفهم ناوية السمية والنبيلة فاعل لم تكن تلك.
The small powers often come bearing gifts. The Middle East has oil. Edward House says, we don't need Arab oil. We've got Texas.
We have always lived with the gun. During the Cretan insurrection, I escaped into the mountains. I was one of the rebels. In the hills, I used to read the Sunday Times to learn English, but my rifle was always across my knee.
As the newly created states profess allegiance to the man of peace, their agents prowl the Paris backstreets looking for arms to buy. The old way of doing things will not die overnight. The big powers, already armed to the teeth, have other needs.
Talk to people on the street here in Paris. They say they don't really care that much about political questions, boundaries, flags, cows. Ils s'en foutent. That's what they say. They just want peace. Get back to living. They're very sincere. But at the end, you know what they say? But Germany must pay. For otherwise, what is to happen to France? What is to happen to us? What about our dead husbands? What about our stolen cows? How are we to live? German gold is the answer to all their problems. That's what they think.
Moving pictures are being shown with French actors playing the dreaded Hun. Making peace in this atmosphere of simmering hate will be difficult. Nicholson writes, "My attitude toward Germany was a compound of fear, admiration, sympathy, and distrust. I hated them for their practical ruthlessness. I despised them for their political ineptitude. But I felt no residue of revengefulness, only an ardent desire that Germany in future might be rendered innocuous." In northern France, many world leaders take time out from diplomacy to walk the trenches. Wilson refuses. Peace must not be made with emotion, he says. Rarely does Wilson stray far from the Quai d'Orsay. Coached by Edward House, the president is proving to be a quick study in the sometimes disagreeable art of compromise. A month into the conference, a young activist named Ho Chi Minh from the French colony of Indochina requests an audience before the Supreme Council. Ho Chi Minh never gets his audience. His country will later become Vietnam. Wilson calls Australian Prime Minister Billy Hughes a pestiferous varmint, but the president ends up giving Hughes New Guinea.
It is sad to see people who have come all the way from Adrianopolis given only 10 minutes in that large hot room in front of 5 bored people. The lives of several thousand people are being changed at the stroke of a midnight pen.
Germany is meticulously preparing the case that she's not solely guilty of starting the war. Officers with a bad conscience are, nevertheless, advised to go into hiding. Thousands do. Keynes, meanwhile, is proving to be as good as his contrarian reputation. He is advocating Germany pay only for physical damage, not the $300 billion his boss, Lloyd George, is demanding. widows might have to fend for themselves. André Tardieu, Clemenceau's foreign minister, writes, Keynes's insular egotism cannot grasp what invasion means. Wilson, too, is advocating moderation for German reparations. This puts him squarely at odds with Lloyd George, who has promised to pick the German pockets dry. Germany remains unstable. Right-wing thugs are promising to restore German pride if Paris fails. Foreign Minister Count Ulrich von Brockdorff-Rantzau is chosen to head the delegation that will go to France. The Count is one of the few high officials who doesn't have blood on his hands from the Great War. In Paris, the Hun is being whittled down to size. Germany loses 8 million citizens and 10% of her land mass. But for Clemenceau, that's not enough. He wants a disputed area that belongs to Germany.
We need the Saar, Mr. President. Northern France needs that coal.
Perhaps there could be a way.
You need the League of Nations.
I'm told the Armenians are now in favor of the League and will vote for it.
No.
Clemenceau is most dangerous when he's serving up compliments. Wilson is equally dangerous when he believes the praise. Wilson gives Clemenceau control of the Saar for 15 years, although most people there are German. One by one, Wilson is violating his cherished principles.
The force of compulsion of Woodrow Wilson in those early months of 1919 was overwhelming. It never occurred to us that if need arose, he would hesitate to use it.
As Woodrow Wilson confounds his apostles, Paris swirls with rumor that Weizmann the Jew is finding sympathy with the Allies, that Faisal the Arab is getting the cold shoulder, that the Japanese have something up their sleeves, that in a very complicated world, Harold Nicholson is showing himself to be as agile as Woodrow Wilson.
Everything is being rushed at a feverish pace. The Saar, reparations, everything is boiling over at the same time.
Keynes has figured out a way to balance the French accounts by having Britain's National Gallery acquire paintings by Manet, Corot, and Delacroix at bargain prices. Nothing is sacred in Paris. The president often consults House about his frustrations with Europe. House's response: we're dealing with men, not angels. Wilson is using every bit of America's economic clout to get the League. He doesn't like having to bargain, it offends him. But for the League, he will do anything. It is now 5 weeks into the conference. In map rooms across Paris, hundreds of thousands of people are being shifted from one nationality to another. Germany has yet to be summoned.
A century for you is very long. For us, it's the blink of an eye.
We too have a history, despite what the Europeans like to say.
The history of the United States is a glorious history, but it's rather short, Mr. President.
We have to try to escape our history.
We breeze it.
Look, we have two choices. Either we cancel Germany's debt entirely and let her rebuild and become a partner in the world community.
Not a chance, John.
Or we open our markets to her goods to let her earn the money to pay us back.
We could never do that. Our workers wouldn't permit it.
The peace conference is in danger of collapsing. Nobody can agree on reparations. Everybody wants land. And there are egos.
The League will have a force in Europe.
How fast can your league get here?
Fast enough, I think.
Do you really think so? If the Germans leave after dinner, they can reach Paris before breakfast. Besides, I'm hearing different things about your Congress.
If the Russians come knocking, will the League be able to stop them?
I'm quite sure the League will not be strong enough either for Germans or for Russians.
Italia will certainly do her part, but for that, abbiamo bisogno di un porto e territorio sull'Adriatico.
We have a monstrous problem. Everyone owes everyone else immense sums of money.
Except America.
Hundreds of billions of dollars. Germany owes a large sum to the Allies. Presumably we'll figure out how much.
It's gonna be a lot.
I know that.
If Russia and Germany join forces, what would your League do?
Will your Congress declare war on foreign soil? Let the American guys die under the League of Nations flag?
Most certainly.
Well, America's not threatened. I don't think so. That's not what I'm hearing from Washington.
Peace is a risk. France has to risk it now. France has everything in its hands if it will only risk it.
America will want its money back sooner or later.
America has already made a killing, the war in trade. She can afford to wait.
The world will stop celebrating soon, and then accounts will have to be settled.
You'll get your league, Mr. President. I promise you that. It's just that we need our own protection.
We are not like you.
But we all want what you want. Mr. Prime Minister, I think we all want that.
We'll get your league.
Will not disappoint you about your League, Mr. President.
Then I suspect you'll be able to breathe a little more easily.
Edward House writes, "When I telephoned the president at 7 o'clock that we had finished the League covenant, he was astounded and delighted." A toast is offered to the League of Nations and to President Wilson's courageous vision. In Berlin, it is announced that Johann Giespertz and Walter Siemens will join Brockdorff-Rantzau on the German delegation going to Paris. Like everyone else, the Germans believe Woodrow Wilson will give them justice. The following day, Woodrow Wilson set sail for America. He must still get Senate approval for the League. He will return to Europe in a month. Wilson has achieved an astonishing triumph. In the face of considerable opposition in Europe and growing isolationism in America, he has got his League of Nations passed by the conference. But it is clear to almost everyone that the League is in trouble in America, and the peace conference itself is in trouble in Paris. Shortly after Wilson's departure, Georges Clemenceau leaves his private residence.
de vous informer qu'on a tiré sur le Premier ministre français cet après-midi.
Word of the shooting spreads quickly throughout Paris. One bullet lodges under Clemenceau's shoulder. It is close to his spinal cord. It is assumed the assassin is either a German agent or a Russian revolutionary. Wilson hears of the shooting in New York. He's profoundly shaken. News of the assassination attempt reaches Germany the same day. There are no tears in Berlin. As it turns out, the assassin, Émile Cotin, is a French anarchist. I wanted to kill Clemenceau, he says, because he was preparing for another war. The French Prime Minister, with a bullet permanently lodged in his body, is more linked to his soldiers than ever.
Since the attempt on Clemenceau's life, Paris bristles with detectives. The French have learned that some anarchists are after Venizelo's blood. We are dogged by detectives and motorcycles constantly. Not much happening, pending Wilson's return.
Physically weak from non-stop negotiating, Wilson is once more sailing into the unknown. To add to his woes, the president is also receiving disturbing telegrams about the activities of his confidant, Edward House. In Paris, a major decision is now taken. Henceforth, the Supreme Council, minus Japan, will meet in private. Openness has not worked. During wars, secrecy may be necessary. Wars are by nature undemocratic. Whether peace benefits from secrecy is another question. The Big Four are now more powerful than any men in history. The war is never far away from the peacemakers. Hospitals are choked with wounded soldiers. Letters are drafted to anxious parents. Have received your son, Albert James Madison. Regret. Barring a miracle, his left leg. Thibaut Danton, 17 years. German gas is permanently seized. Uncontrolled shaking due to Hun gas. J. Edwards Lamb, 23. And catastrophic damage to his central nervous. Worthington lost total control over his body. John Jacobs, 19. Delirious. Little hope of. Smithers Jones. Harry Pocklington. The Big Four were all highly successful wartime leaders. They are now discovering that making peace is sometimes more difficult than making war. We regret to inform you that at 2:13 p.m. your son left this earth. A short time later, Wilson summons Edward House. Wilson feels he's been negotiating behind his back. The Europeans prefer House to Wilson. He's willing to compromise. Wilson tells House the president alone makes American policy. House effectively is out. With Edward House gone, President Wilson is more isolated than ever. Berlin, 6 German negotiators, and 180 secretaries, translators, lawyers, journalists, barbers, and cooks set off for Paris. They bring with them documents allegedly proving Germany alone did not start the war. The Big Four will monitor the train's progress in Wilson's study. This is what the world has waited for.
The surrender of German colonies must be total and definitive. The surrender of the German Navy, total and definitive. They are on their way.
From newspaper accounts, Brockdorff-Rantzau is aware of what Paris is thinking.
Schuld, 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 Schuld. Meine Herren, wer ist im Krieg wohl unschuldig? Wir können den Tod nicht wieder lebendig machen. Alle Armeen begehen Grausamkeiten. Dafür werden sie bezahlt. Auch die Alliierten liegen in Kriegskreuen.
There will be no half measures. The surrender of a large portion of the German merchant fleet, total and definitive.
Das Deutsche Reich fühlte sich bedroht. Russland ging Verrat.
Unsere Wirtschaft war am Boden.
Wir können unsere eigenen Leute nicht ernähren.
Wir verlangen lediglich ein neutrales Gericht, um die Schuldfrage zu klären. Auch wir litten unter ihren Taten. Auch unsere Frauen wurden vergewaltigt.
The exclusion of Germany from foreign markets. Total, and will last for a considerable time. No admission to the League of Nations, not now.
When?
I don't know, sometimes in the future. And I want to know what each of those German delegates did during the war. These are not negotiable.
The remedy is not proportional to the evil.
They were the first to use poisonous gas. It was the German that began the bombing and long-distance shelling of towns for no military object, but solely for the purpose of reducing the morale of their opponents by striking at the women and children. They drove thousands of men and women and children with brutal savagery into slavery in foreign lands. They allowed barbarities to be practiced against their prisoners of war, from which the most uncivilized people would have recoiled. How much German gold, how much German pride equals 1,300,000 dead? What actuary do we consult? Do we talk to your Mr. Case?
Walter Siemens, the lawyer for the German delegation, often writes to his wife during this time.
Der erste Eindruck von den besetzten Gebieten ließ meine Seele verdorren. Dann allerdings kam Nordfrankreich. Es war eine erschütternde Erfahrung, obwohl wir von Bildern und Beschreibungen wussten, wie ein Schlachtfeld aussah.